Ezra Callahan put a bullet through the eviction notice before the sheriff's deputy finished reading it aloud. The paper jumped off the fence post and landed in the mud. Nobody moved. The deputy's horse shied left. 3 townsmen standing by the road went very still. "You just shot a legal document," the deputy said. "I know what I shot." Ezra lowered the rifle. "Tell Judge Harding if he wants my land, he can come get it himself. I'll be home." He turned and walked back to the house. Inside, a woman he'd known 11 days was braiding his daughter's hair. If this story hits something real in you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because you need to know what brought them here. She didn't knock on the front door. Vivian Marsh had learned in 8 months of running that front doors were for people with names that opened them. She went to the barn. It was past 10 at night. Wyoming cold in January. 1878 wasn't something you argued with. It made decisions for you. Closed roads, shut down, passes, turned a 2-day ride into a death sentence. Vivi knew the canyon north of Casper Creek had drifted shut that afternoon. She'd watched it happen from the ridge, watched the snow fill the gap like a door swinging closed, and she'd had exactly one thought: find shelter or don't wake up. She pulled the barn door open with one hand and kept the other on Danny's wrist. He was 5. He'd stopped crying an hour ago. That was the part that scared her, not the crying, but the stopping. Lily walked beside her, 7 years old, quiet, in the way she'd been quiet since Kansas City, the way that meant she was measuring everything and trusting nothing. The barn was dark. Vivi struck a match, found a lantern on the post, got it lit. "Mama." Lily's voice was barely sound. "Someone's coming." The lantern light caught him in the doorway. A big man, not tall, but wide, the way work made men. Wide, holding a rifle across his body, not raised, not lowered, just held. His face was in shadow, but she could see his eyes catching the light. "Don't shoot," she said. "I've got children." He looked past her at Lily, at Danny. "I can see that," he said. "We need somewhere to sleep, just tonight. I'll be gone before first light. I won't touch anything. I won't—" "How old's the little one?" She stopped. 5. He looked at the sky the way men in this territory looked at weather they didn't like. Long, quiet, like he was giving himself room to think without his feelings getting in the way. "Storm came down from the north an hour ago," he said. "Canyon Pass is closed. Road south drifted to the fence line around supper time." He looked back at her. "You sleep in this barn, you'll be snowed in by morning with no heat and 2 children. I've managed worse." "I don't doubt it." He stepped back from the doorframe. "But I'm not offering the barn. There's a room off the kitchen. Door locks from the inside. Lock it if you want." He turned and walked toward the house. "Children's plates are still warm. Storm didn't give me much appetite." Vivi stood in the barn doorway. Danny pressed his face against her coat. She followed the man inside. His name was Ezra Callahan. He told her that while he was pouring coffee, he clearly didn't intend to drink standing at the counter with his back half to her, giving her room. She told him her name, Vivian Marsh. She watched his face when she said it. He didn't react to Marsh, which meant he hadn't heard about St. Louis yet, which meant she had a little time. "2 children in the loft," he said. "Jacob's 9. Grace is 6. They sleep hard. They won't hear you settle in." He set a plate on the table. Biscuits, cold beans, the end of something that had been supper. "Eat if you want." "I told you we don't take—" "You told me nothing yet." He finally turned around. His eyes were the color of creek water in winter, gray-green, clear, not unkind. "You been on that road since when?" She looked at the food. Danny was pulling at her coat. Since dawn, she said. Then eat. She sat down. She fed the children first. He refilled the coffee and didn't watch her do it, which was how she knew he'd been raised right. Men who'd been raised right knew not to watch a hungry woman feed her children. When Danny fell asleep in the chair, Ezra lifted him without asking and carried him to the back room like it was nothing like he'd carried sleeping children his whole life. She'd find out later. He'd carried Jacob like that for 6 months after Maggie died, every night the boy refusing to sleep in his own bed, and Ezra too tired and too broken to insist. He didn't tell her that then. He just came back to the kitchen, said, "Room's ready," and went to bed. Vivi locked the door. She lay on the pallet beside Danny and stared at the ceiling and thought about Wade Marsh, who had a judge in Missouri and a lawyer named Fenton, and a letter signed by 2 witnesses claiming she had abandoned her children's stable home environment. She thought about what stable meant to a man like Wade: money, property, a fixed address, a husband, none of which she had. She thought about Robert. She still did that, thought about him, and tried to find the line between the man she'd married and the man he'd been. She hadn't found it yet. Maybe there wasn't a line. Maybe they'd been the same man the whole time, and she'd just been too young and too hopeful to see it. You should have known, Wade had said the day he showed her the sheriff's report. A decent woman would have known. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth and didn't make a sound. She didn't sleep until after midnight. When she did, she didn't dream. She hadn't dreamed in 8 months. Morning came gray. She was up before it finished arriving. She found the kitchen already warm, coffee already made, a covered plate on the counter with a cloth over it. She stood there looking at the plate. Then she heard the back door and Ezra came in. Dusted white, stomped his boots, saw her standing there. "Storm held through," he said. He moved past her to pour coffee. "North Pass is still closed. South Road's worse than last night." "How long?" "Could be 2 days, could be 3. "I can't." "Road doesn't care what you can't." He set his cup down. "My fence line on the south pasture needs checking. Storm like this, rails go down under the weight. That's a half-day job, full day if the drifts are bad." He looked at her, straight at her, the way she'd stopped expecting men to look, not taking inventory, just looking. "You know fence work." She thought about her father's farm in Missouri. The line posts, the wire, the way her hands had bled the first winter until they calloused over. "I know fence work," she said. "Then eat your breakfast. It's wages." He went back out. Vivi sat down and ate every bite on that plate. His children came down the loft ladder at 7. Jacob first. He stopped at the bottom rung when he saw Vivi, and his hand tightened, and he looked at her with eyes that had been running calculations since before he should have had to. "Pa know you're here." "He made the coffee," Vivi said. Jacob came the rest of the way down. Grace followed, 6 years old, red-cheeked, both braids half undone, and walked straight to Vivi the way small children walked toward things that felt safe before their minds could argue them out of it. "Your little boy cried last night," Grace said. "I heard him through the wall. I didn't tell Pa because sometimes people don't want you to tell." Vivi blinked. "That was kind of you." "Is he scared of things?" "He's been scared of a few things lately." Grace considered this with enormous seriousness. "I was scared after Mama died. Pa let me sleep in the big chair with a quilt. You could tell your boy about the chair." Jacob was watching all of it. His expression was the expression of a boy who'd been the man of something for too long. "You're not going to cause trouble," he said, not a question. "I never go looking for it," Vivi said. "Doesn't matter." He went to the stove. "It finds you anyway." He said it like he knew. At 9 years old, he already knew. Lily and Grace disappeared together before 8 o'clock, which Vivi registered with the particular relief of watching her daughter do something easy for the first time in months. Danny attached himself to Jacob at 3 feet of distance, following him around the cabin, watching every move he made. Jacob didn't say go away. He didn't say come here either. He just worked, and Danny shadowed him, and after a while, Jacob started talking low and even. Like he wasn't making a decision about it. This is how you check if the wood's caught. You watch for the color of the smoke, see how it goes blue when it's right. Danny nodded, like this was the most important information he'd ever received. Vivi turned back to the stove and pressed her hand flat against the iron and held it there until the heat made her pull away, which gave her something to focus on that wasn't her son's face. She went out to check the fence. Ezra found her on the south line 2 hours later. She'd cleared 4 posts and reset a broken rail and was driving the last nail when she heard him coming. She didn't stop working. He stood at the end of the cleared section and looked at it without speaking. "Missouri farm," she said before he could ask. "My father believed in equal labor, said the fence didn't know the difference." Ezra picked up the other end of the next rail without a word. They worked. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who were used to working alongside others and didn't need noise to fill it. After a while he said, "Your husband." "Dead," she said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She drove a nail. "He wasn't who I thought." He didn't press. She noticed that about him, he had weight behind his eyes, opinions he wasn't spending carelessly. He said things when they meant something and held the rest. They worked until the light went thin and gray. Walking back, she asked, "Why'd you really open the door last night?" He was quiet through 3 steps. 4. "My son stopped talking after his mother died," he said. "Not all the way, just the real kind. Went quiet in here." He touched his chest once brief. "This morning I heard him explaining the wood stove to your boy." Vivi kept walking. "Some things matter more than sense," Ezra said. He held the gate. "That's all." She walked through without answering. But she heard it. She heard all of it. The storm doubled on the second night. Wind from the north, snow driving sideways, cold that found every gap in the walls and settled in like it belonged there. Ezra strung a rope from the porch to the barn safety line, he told the children, because in a storm like this, a man could lose his bearings between 2 buildings 30 yards apart. Grace wanted to know if that really happened. "To my father," Ezra said. 19 years ago, February storm. He went out to check the horses and we didn't find him until the thaw." The room went quiet. "I'm sorry, Mr. Callahan," Lily said in her careful, measuring voice. Ezra looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Thank you, miss," he said. Formal, respectful. The way you talk to someone who said a true thing simply. Vivi watched this exchange and felt something move in her chest that she didn't have a name for. She cooked. It was what she knew how to do with worry, burn it into something useful. She made what was in the larder into something that smelled like a home. Because smell was the thing that made a place feel safe. She'd learned that before she learned almost anything else. Grace stood on a stool beside her and handed her things and asked questions at a rate that would have worn most people down to bone. Vivi answered every one. Jacob set up a game at the table. Dried beans, a coffee tin rules that shifted whenever someone was about to lose. Danny laughed once, then twice. The second time, Vivi kept her back to the room and breathed through it. She hadn't heard him laugh since before Kansas City. Ezra sat in the chair by the window mending harness leather, not looking at any of it directly, just warming himself by it. She understood that too, how you could be starving for something and still afraid to look at it head on. After the children were in the loft, she sat at the table with her coffee and said what she'd been carrying since she arrived. "I have to tell you something." Ezra set down the harness. "My husband's name was Robert Marsh. He died in St. Louis." She kept her eyes level. "In a bank robbery. He was one of the men who went in to take the money." She watched his face. His expression didn't move. "I didn't know what he was when I married him. I've spent 8 months deciding whether I should have known sooner. I think maybe I should have." Silence. "His brother Wade Marsh filed papers in a Missouri court, claims I abandoned a stable home environment, claims I'm unfit. She said the legal words flat, the way you said things you'd memorized past the point of feeling them. He's got money and lawyers and a judge who owes him favors. He's got 2 witnesses who'll say what he paid them to say. She folded her hands on the table. If he finds me here a widow, no property, no family living in a single man's house, it looks exactly the way he wants it to look. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. How long you been moving? He said. 8 months. Where before? Wyoming. Kansas. Before that, Missouri. Before that, I stopped counting. He looked at the fire. He looked back at her. His jaw was tight with something she couldn't read, not judgment, not discomfort, something older than that. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. Slow, like he didn't say it often. February. I'd been warned about the fever moving through the territory. Doctor in Cheyenne was charging $40 cash up front, which was $40 I didn't have because I'd put everything into the spring cattle run. He stopped. I kept telling her it'll pass, it'll pass. It didn't pass. Vivi didn't say anything. Jacob blamed me for 2 years, Ezra said. Stopped saying so around year 3. That was worse. He picked up the harness again, set it back down. I'm telling you because I know what it is to carry something that wasn't all your fault and feel like it was all your fault anyway. The fire cracked. Outside, wind hit the north wall like a fist. You're safe here, he said. Long as you need. Wade Marsh doesn't stop for weather. Neither do I. She looked at him across the table. This man she'd known 2 days. This man who'd carried his sleeping son for 6 months and strung a safety rope to his own barn and talked to his dead wife's memory every night in a voice she'd heard through the wall and never mentioned. Good night, Ezra, she said. Night, Vivi. She went to the back room. She locked the door, not because she was afraid, but because old habits were the last things to loosen. She lay in the dark and listened to the storm work on the walls and thought about Wade Marsh in a warm Missouri courtroom with his lawyer and his judge and his version of the truth. She fell asleep faster than she had in 8 months. She dreamed for the first time since Robert died. She didn't remember what about. But when she woke, her face was wet, and for once, she didn't feel ashamed of it. So, 3rd morning, storm broken, world outside white and sharp and clean the way things got after violence. Ezra came in from the barn at first light and found her coat on her bag at her feet. He looked at the bag. He looked at her. Road's not clear, he said. I know. Then what are you doing? Saving you from what's coming. She kept her voice even. Wade Marsh has a court letter, Ezra. If he tracks me here, and he will track me, he has people who do nothing else. He walks into a Wyoming court and says, widow woman, no property living in a widower's home, no chaperone, no family children exposed to an unstable and morally questionable environment. She picked up the bag. He wins. He takes Lily and Danny, and I never see them again. Ezra didn't move from the doorway. And if you walk into that canyon past this morning, he said, with 2 children under 6 and 4 feet of snow and the temperature where it is right now. He stopped. I'll read about you in the spring thaw, Vivi. You and both of them. The words hit flat and true, and she couldn't argue past them. From the loft, Grace's voice patient and certain explaining something to Lily that Lily clearly found very interesting. From the corner by the stove, Danny cross-legged on the floor sorting dried beans by color. Jacob sat 3 feet away pretending to sharpen a knife and not watching him. Danny held up a red bean. This one's a chief, he said. Jacob didn't look up. Chiefs are usually bigger. Danny considered this, found a bigger red bean, held it up. Better, Jacob said. Vivi's grip on the bag loosened. She stood there for another moment. Then she carried the bag back to the room. She took off her coat. She hung it on the peg behind the door. Maggie's peg she'd find out later, the one nobody had used in 3 years. She came back to the kitchen. Ezra had fresh coffee on the table at her spot. He didn't say a word about the coat, about the bag, about any of it. He just sat down across from her and picked up his cup. Outside, the sun hit the snow, and the whole world went white and blazing, and almost unbearably bright, the way things looked after a storm broke, like the world was showing off what it could do when it stopped trying to kill you. Old Mo Hayes appeared from the bunkhouse direction limping, but moving, and hollered something about the south pasture gate. Ezra called back something that made the old man laugh. At the corner of the table, Danny set his chief bean at the head of all the others, and looked very satisfied. Lily leaned over and moved one of the other beans closer. "He needs a general," she said. Danny thought about this, nodded, appointed the general. Vivi wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and let the warmth move up through her palms. It was enough. It was more than she'd had in 8 months. It was the most dangerous kind of thing, something worth fighting for. Something worth losing sleep over. Something that if it broke, would break her in a way she wasn't sure she'd come back from. Which meant Wade Marsh when he came, and he would come, she knew he would come, wasn't just riding toward a woman and 2 children anymore. He was riding toward something she would not give up without a war. The town of Casper Creek had a way of knowing things before they happened. By the 4th morning, every soul within riding distance had heard that Ezra Callahan was housing a woman. Not a relative, not a widow of a friend. A stranger young alone with 2 children that weren't his, and a name nobody recognized. Mrs. Porter heard it from the blacksmith's wife. Reverend Brody heard it from Mrs. Porter. And by Sunday the whole congregation knew it the way congregations always knew things, imprecisely dramatically and with absolute confidence. Vivi didn't know any of that yet. She was in Ezra's kitchen making cornbread when the first visitor arrived. She heard the horse before she heard the knock. Old Mo appeared in the doorway from the barn side, wiping his hands, and looked at her with an expression she'd learned to read in 4 days, the expression of a man who knew something was coming, and had decided not to be the one to say it first. "Company," he said. "What kind?" "The church hat kind." The knock came sharp and deliberate, the knock of someone who considered themselves entitled to answers. Vivi set down the spoon. She looked at the door. She thought about 8 months of running, and every door she'd stood on the wrong side of, and she straightened her spine and went to open it. The woman on the porch was perhaps 50, dressed well for a ranch community, with the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of believing her presence was a courtesy she extended to rooms. She looked at Vivi the way customs officers looked at luggage assessing, categorizing, already writing the report. "I'm Helen Porter," the woman said. "My husband is mayor of Casper Creek. I've come to call on Ezra." "He's on the south pasture," Vivi said. "I can tell him you came by." Mrs. Porter's eyes moved past her into the kitchen, took inventory. The cornbread. The children's coats on the hooks. Grace's drawing on the table. Danny's chief bean still at the head of its army on the windowsill. "And you are," Mrs. Porter said, "Vivian Marsh. I'm helping with the household while the snow keeps the road closed." "Helping." Mrs. Porter repeated the word with the precise inflection of someone filing it away to use differently later. "I see. Are you a relation of Ezra's?" "No, ma'am." "A family friend?" "We met 4 days ago." The silence that followed had texture to it, thick and deliberate. "Well?" Mrs. Porter smiled the smile of a woman who had learned to weaponize pleasantness. "I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. In the meantime, perhaps you could tell Ezra that the town council meets Thursday evening. There are matters to discuss." She paused. "Community matters." She left before Vivi could respond. Vivi stood in the open doorway and watched the horse until it cleared the ridge. Then she closed the door and stood with her back against it for a moment, eyes on the ceiling, breathing. "She didn't like you," Grace said from the table without looking up from her drawing. "No," Vivi said. "She didn't. She doesn't like most people. Pa says she's not mean, she's just scared of things she can't organize." Grace looked up. "What's she scared of about you?" Vivi pushed off the door and went back to the cornbread. "I'm not something she can organize," she said. Grace considered this. That makes sense, she said, and went back to her drawing. Ezra came in at noon, and Vivi told him about the visit flat and plain. The way she reported everything, facts first, interpretation, after letting him draw his own conclusions. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he poured himself water, drank half of it, set the glass down. Thursday meeting, he said. That's what she said. They've been looking for a reason to discuss my land for 2 years. Porter wants the east pasture for his cattle run. He looked at her. His expression was not apology and not warning. It was something in between, the look of a man telling you the truth about something he wished wasn't true. This gives him a different kind of reason. I know, Vivi said. Which is why I want to say again, don't. Ezra. Vivi. He said her name the way he said everything that mattered, short and certain. You finish the cornbread. I'll handle Thursday. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and understood that arguing was a thing he'd already anticipated and already decided against. She picked up the spoon. The road north, she said. When? Another week. Maybe less if the temperature holds. He moved toward the back door. Plenty of time to be useful. Is that what you're calling this? He stopped. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, more like the idea of one the shape a smile left behind. What would you call it? She didn't answer. He went back outside. She finished the cornbread. It came out right. Jacob found her that afternoon in the barn, checking on the horses the way Ezra had shown her, running her hand along the near mare's flank to feel for heat or tension. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, watching her with those 2 old eyes. She'd noticed he did this, appeared in doorways, watched without announcing himself, like he was running reconnaissance before committing to engagement. You do know horses, he said finally. Missouri farm, she said. Same as the fences. He came in and stood on the other side of the mare, mirroring her without seeming to know he was doing it. They worked in silence for a moment, and she let it sit, because she'd learned that Jacob Callahan said what he was going to say on his own timeline, or not at all. Mrs. Porter's going to tell people, he said. I know. They're going to talk. People usually do. He was quiet. Then, after Mama died, they talked about Pa. Said he let her die because he was too stubborn to sell the east pasture and pay the doctor proper. Said a man who loved his wife wouldn't have done that. His hands kept moving on the mare's side, steady. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter that it wasn't true. It still followed him everywhere. Vivi kept her eyes on the horse. How old were you? 6. That's young to understand all that. I didn't understand it, Jacob said. I just heard it. Understanding came later. That's worse, actually. When you're older and you go back and understand what people were doing. He looked across the mare at her. I don't want them doing it to Pa again. Neither do I, she said. Then why are you still here? It wasn't an accusation. It was a real question asked with real directness, the way children ask things before they learn to be afraid of the answers. Vivi stopped moving. She thought about the canyon pass, the 4 feet of snow, Danny appointing his chief bean, Lily drawing with her stick in the dirt the way she hadn't drawn since Robert died. She thought about Ezra's face when he said some things matter more than sense and meant it completely. Because the road's closed, she said. Jacob looked at her for a long moment. Is that the only reason? She didn't answer. He nodded like that was an answer too. He patted the mare once and walked back toward the cabin, his footsteps even and deliberate in the snow. Wednesday night, Ezra found her by the dying fire. The children were asleep, all 4 of them, Grace having decided at some point in the past 3 days that she and Lily were sisters in everything but paperwork, and Danny having moved from Jacob's shadow to Jacob's actual bunk, a transition that Jacob had accepted with elaborate indifference. The cabin was quiet in the way it only got after 9 o'clock when the work was done, and the noise of children settled, and the fire went from active to patient. She was sitting in the straight-backed chair near the hearth, not Ezra's chair by the window. She'd never sat in that one. She had a cup of tea going cold in her hands, and she was looking at the fire, the way people looked at fires when they were thinking about something they didn't want to say out loud. Ezra came down the hall and stopped when he saw she was still up. He almost went back. She could see him make the decision, the small pause, the choosing. He came in and added a log to the fire. "Can't sleep," he said, thinking. He sat in the chair by the window, the same chair he sat in every evening. She'd watched him in it, watched him think and work, and occasionally look out the glass at nothing in particular with an expression on his face she'd only seen on people carrying long grief. She knew that expression. She wore it herself, different shape, same weight. "Tell me about Maggie," she said. He looked at her. "You told me how she died," Vivi said. "That's not the same thing." Ezra was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he leaned back and looked at the fire himself. "She laughed at everything," he said. Not the way people laugh to be polite. The real kind. Things would strike her as funny, and she'd just go. Jacob's got her laugh. Grace has got her stubborn streak. He paused. "She used to argue with me about the cattle decisions. I never told her she was wrong because she was usually right. Drove me half out of my mind." Something crossed his face, brief and painful and real. "I'd give anything to be argued with like that again." Vivi felt the ache of that land in her chest like a stone. "Robert never argued with me," she said, "about anything important. I thought that meant we agreed. Now I think it meant he didn't believe my opinions were worth the trouble of a real conversation." She looked at her cold tea. "I'd have preferred the argument." Ezra looked at her across the room. "What did you argue about when you did fight?" "Money. Where we were going to live. Whether Lily needed shoes before winter, or could wait until the next paycheck." She shook her head. "Normal things. Except the normal things turned out to be built on something I didn't know was rotten." She set the cup down. "I keep thinking, what did I miss? What was right in front of me that I didn't see? And I can't find it. I've looked at every memory I have of that man, and I cannot find the moment I should have known." "Maybe there wasn't a moment," Ezra said. "Maybe he hid it. Then what does that say about me that I couldn't see it? It says he was good at hiding it. Wade says, Wade Marsh." Ezra said with a flatness in his voice she hadn't heard before, "Is a man who lost his brother and decided to blame the nearest woman for it. His opinion of what you should have seen is not worth the breath it took to say it." The fire popped. Somewhere outside the wind moved through the pines. "You sound sure," Vivi said. "I've watched you for 5 days." He said it simply the way he said everything. A woman who couldn't see things wouldn't be watching every door, every expression, every shift in the room the way you do. You see everything. You saw it all too late with him because you were choosing to believe in something you'd built together, and that's not blindness, that's hope. Hope and blindness look the same from outside. They're not the same thing. Vivi stared at him. She'd had 8 months of people, lawyers, neighbors, Wade Marsh's witnesses, sheriffs in 2 states, tell her what she should have known and when she should have known it. She'd had 8 months of building a case against herself in her own head, brick by brick, until it was a wall she couldn't see past. She didn't know what to do with someone taking the wall apart. "You're a surprising man, Ezra Callahan," she said. "Not particularly." "You are." She picked up her cup. The tea was cold, but she drank it anyway. "Most men your age have decided what they think about things and stopped looking for reasons to change their minds. Most men my age haven't had a 9-year-old tell them for 2 years that they were wrong about something and eventually turn out to be right." He looked at the fire. "Jacob's a good teacher. Painful, but thorough." She almost laughed. The almost was enough. He caught it, and the corner of his mouth moved, and for a moment the room felt lighter than it had any right to feel, given everything pressing down on both of them. "The council meeting's tomorrow," Vivi said. "I know." What are you going to say? The truth. The truth won't be enough for men like Porter. Maybe not. He looked at her directly. But I'm done saying things that aren't true to make men like Porter comfortable. Did enough of that after Maggie died. Smiled and nodded and said the right things, and it didn't change anything except made me feel like I was wearing a coat that belonged to somebody else. She understood that. She understood it so completely, it felt like a bruise being pressed. If they vote against you tomorrow, she said carefully, it affects your land, your children's future. Yes. And you're still going. Yes. Why? He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men look at her when they were calculating something. The way you looked at a thing you'd decided about clean and clear. Because Jacob's watching, he said. Everything I do, that boy is watching. And I will not let him grow up thinking the right thing to do is the quiet thing to do. Vivi looked down at her hands. Get some sleep, Ezra said. He stood, moved toward the hall. Long day tomorrow. Ezra. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for what you said, about hope. He stood in the doorway with his back to her for a moment. Just the truth, he said. Same as everything else. He went to bed. Vivi sat by the dying fire and let the warmth work on her hands, and thought about hope and blindness, and the difference between them, and thought about a 9-year-old boy in a doorway saying it finds you anyway, with the certainty of someone who already knew what she was just beginning to understand. She thought about Wade Marsh, who was not stopped by weather or distance, or anything else she'd tried to put between herself and him, and who would eventually arrive at the end of whatever road led here, because men like Wade didn't let go of things they'd decided were theirs. She thought about Ezra walking into that council meeting tomorrow and saying the truth to men who didn't want to hear it. She thought, if he can do that, so can I. She banked the fire. She went to the back room. She did not lock the door. Not because anything had changed between them, nothing had not in the way people meant when they meant something had changed, but because a locked door was a thing you did when you were afraid of what was outside it, and she was beginning, slowly, painfully, the way ice broke in March, not all at once, but piece by piece, to believe that what was outside this particular door was not something to be afraid of. She lay down in the dark. She thought, Wade is coming. She thought, let him come. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind working on the eaves, and this time when she dreamed, she remembered it in the morning. She was standing in a field she didn't recognize, and the grass was green the way Wyoming grass never was, and Lily was running ahead of her laughing, and Danny was on her back with his arms around her neck, and when she looked back, there was nobody chasing them. Just open ground, just distance, just room. She woke up with the dream still in her hands, like something she could hold, and for 30 seconds before the day came back with all its weight, she let herself hold it. 30 seconds was more than she'd had in 8 months. It was enough to get up on. Ezra left for the council meeting at 6:30 alone. Vivi had offered to come. He'd looked at her the way he looked at weather he couldn't change, steady, patient, already decided. Stay with the children, he said. I won't be long. He picked up his coat and his hat, and he walked out the door, and she stood at the window and watched him go, until the dark swallowed him whole. Old Mo appeared at her shoulder from somewhere behind her, the way he always appeared, as if he'd been there the whole time, and only chosen now to be visible. He's gonna be fine, Mo said. I know he will, Vivi said. I'm not worried about him. Then what are you worried about? She didn't answer. Mo made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and went back to wherever he came from, and Vivi stayed at the window with her hand flat on the cold glass and thought about all the ways a man could be fine and still lose everything. The children were at the table. Jacob was teaching Lily a card game, real cards this time, a worn deck that had belonged to Maggie, the kind of detail Vivi had learned not to mention because it lived in that category of things the Callahan household carried quietly. Danny was asleep on the pallet near the fire, the chief bean clutched in one fist. Grace was drawing again, her tongue between her teeth, deeply absorbed in something that appeared to be a horse with an extremely long neck. Is Pa in trouble? Grace said without looking up from the horse. No, Vivi said. Is it because of us? Lily asked. Her voice was careful, the voice she used when she was asking something she'd been holding for a while. Vivi came back to the table and sat down. She looked at both of them. Grace with her impossible horse Lily, with her careful eyes. Jacob pretending to be very focused on the cards. Some people in this town don't like things they can't explain, she said. Your father coming to our aid is something they can't explain, so they're making up an explanation that suits them. She looked at Lily. That's not because of you, that's because of them. What are they saying? Jacob asked, still looking at the cards. Vivi considered how much truth a 9-year-old deserved. She decided on all of it. They're saying your father isn't fit to make his own decisions about who lives on his land. Jacob set the cards down. Flat, deliberate. The gesture of a boy who had learned to manage his anger by controlling the small things his hands were doing. That's stupid, he said. Yes, Vivi agreed. It is. Pa's the most fit person I know. I believe that. He raised us after Mama died, by himself. He kept this land running, and kept us fed and kept the cattle through 2 bad winters. Jacob's voice was even, but something underneath it was not even at all. And some man, who's never done a hard day of anything, gets to sit in a room and say whether Pa's fit. That's how power works sometimes, Vivi said. It doesn't go to the people who deserve it. It goes to the people who grabbed it first and have been holding on since. Jacob looked at her. What do you do about it? She thought about 8 months on the road. She thought about every sheriff's office, and every court letter, and every door that had been closed in her face by people with more authority than sense. She thought about Ezra walking into that building right now alone, saying the truth to men who didn't want to hear it. You keep standing, she said. Even when standing's all you can do. Jacob picked the cards back up. He dealt another hand to Lily. He didn't say anything else. But something in the set of his shoulders changed. Not relaxed exactly, but decided. Like he'd gotten the answer he needed and filed it somewhere he'd be able to find it later. Vivi got up and put the kettle on. Ezra came back at 9. She heard his boots on the porch and had coffee poured before he got the door open. He came in, hung his coat and hat, stood for a moment, looking at the room, the children asleep. The fire low, Vivi at the table, and some of the rigidity went out of his spine. He sat down across from her. He picked up the coffee. He drank half of it before he said anything. Porter called for a formal inquiry, he said, into the suitability of the home environment. Vivi kept her hands still on her cup. What does that mean legally? Means a county official comes out, looks at the property, talks to the children. He set his cup down. It means nothing technically. I own this land outright. There's no charge against me. Porter knows that. He's not trying to win a legal case, he's trying to make enough noise that I feel the pressure. Does he know about Wade Marsh? A pause. Reverend Brody mentioned it. Said he'd heard there were custody complications following you from Missouri. He looked at her steadily. Porter knows. He's working it. The word complications landed in her chest like a dropped stone. I'm sorry, she said. Don't. Ezra. Vivi. He said her name with the same patience he used on everything that mattered. Did you choose to marry a man who robbed banks? No. Did you choose to have Wade Marsh as a brother-in-law? No. Then stop apologizing for things you didn't choose. He picked up his coffee again. Brody also said something else. He said there was a man asking questions in town 2 days ago. At the telegraph office. Stranger. Wore a good coat for somebody riding through Wyoming in January. The cold that moved through Vivi then had nothing to do with the temperature. What kind of questions? She said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. About a woman traveling with 2 children. About which ranches had taken in travelers during the storm. Wade Marsh had people. She'd always known that. She'd known it the way you knew about a weather system moving in from the west. You couldn't see it yet, but the air was already changing around it. "He found me," she said. "Not yet. Man left without answers, according to the telegraph operator." Ezra's jaw was tight. "But he'll be back, or Marsh himself will come." She stood up. She went to the window. Outside was nothing but dark and snow and the distant line of pines. But she looked at it anyway because she needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't Ezra's face, which was carrying too much on her behalf for her to look at directly right now. "I have to go," she said. "No. If he comes here, if he sees me here, everything you said at that meeting tonight means nothing. He'll take that inquiry and that court letter, and he'll build something out of it that I can't fight. He's got... I know what he's got." Ezra's voice was quiet, but it stopped her the way a hand on a horse's bridle stopped it, not harsh, just certain. "He's got money and lawyers and a judge who owes him. You told me." "Then you understand why..." "What I understand," he said, "is that running hasn't worked. 8 months, Vivi. Has it worked?" She turned from the window. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her thighs so he wouldn't see it. "What's the alternative?" she said. "I stay here and he arrives, and suddenly you're in the middle of a custody fight that has nothing to do with you. Let me worry about what has to do with me. I'm not going to let you. You don't get to decide that." He stood up. Not threatening, just standing the way he stood when he'd made a decision and was done negotiating around it. "You asked me 2 nights ago why I was going to that meeting. I told you, because Jacob's watching." He looked at her. "Your children are watching too, Vivi. Every time you pick up that bag, they're watching. Every time you run, they're learning that running is what people do when things get hard." The words hit her somewhere unprotected, and she felt it move through her. Not anger, not exactly something rawer than anger. "That's not fair," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." He didn't take it back. "But it's true." She looked at him across the kitchen. This man who had been a stranger 11 days ago. This man who had opened a door in the dark without knowing what was behind it, and had not once, not a single time acted like he regretted it. "If he comes here," she said, "and it goes wrong, then it goes wrong and we deal with it." He sat back down. "Together." The word sat in the air between them. Simple word. 4-syllable word. The most complicated word in the English language when you'd spent 8 months being entirely alone in everything. She came back to the table. She sat down. She picked up her coffee. "You're a stubborn man," she said. "Runs in the family." He picked up his cup. "Grace gets it from somewhere." Something in her chest loosened, not all the way. Nothing was all the way, but enough. Enough to breathe around. "What did you say?" she asked. "At the meeting. What did you actually say to them?" He was quiet for a moment. "I said that a man's land is his to run as he sees fit, and the people on his land are his business, until someone can show me a law that says otherwise. I said that a woman keeping 2 children alive through a Wyoming winter wasn't a moral failing. It was a feat of endurance, and any town that couldn't see the difference between decency and scandal deserved the reputation it was building." He drank his coffee. "Porter didn't like that last part." "I imagine not." Brody looked uncomfortable, which is better than I expected from Brody. He set the cup down. "Mrs. Porter said nothing the whole meeting. Just sat in the back row and watched. That woman thinks before she moves. I respect it even when it works against me." "What did the others say?" "Harlan Cole runs the feed store, said he didn't see what the fuss was about. Said he'd seen you working the fence line, and it looked like honest labor to him." Something shifted in Ezra's expression. "That mattered more than anything I said. A man defending his own household sounds like a man with something to hide. Another man saying he saw nothing wrong that's different." Vivi thought about a man she'd never spoken to standing up in a town meeting on her behalf based on nothing but watching her work a fence line. The unexpected kindness of strangers had been undoing her steadily since the night she knocked on this barn door. She was running out of walls to put between herself and it. "I'll talk to him," she said. "Harlan Cole. Tomorrow. I'll thank him." He'd like that. Ezra took his cup to the basin. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a full day. The east fence still needs the corner post reset, and Mo's knee won't take the cold." "Ezra." He stopped. "The man in the town. At the telegraph office." She kept her voice even. "I need to know if Wade comes here in person. Legally. What can he actually do in Wyoming territory?" Ezra turned around. "Wyoming gave women the right to vote in '69. First territory in the country to do it. Judges here have seen enough to know that a woman surviving hard circumstances isn't the same as a woman being unfit." He looked at her directly. "A Missouri court letter doesn't automatically carry here. He'd have to petition a Wyoming judge, file new papers, start the process over. That takes time." "It does. Time I could use." "Time we could use," he said. "Same correction as before. Simple. Absolute." She looked at her hands. She thought about 30 seconds of a dream green grass, Danny on her back, nobody chasing. She thought about what it would cost to believe in something like that again, and whether she had enough left to spend on it. "Good night," she said. "Night, Vivi." She went to the back room. She stood in the dark for a moment with her hand on the wall and listened to the sounds of the house, the fire settling the wind in the eaves. Jacob turning over in the loft, Danny's small breathing from the pallet. All of it ordinary. All of it the kind of ordinary she had not had in 8 months and had stopped believing she deserved. She thought, Wade is coming. She thought, let him come to a woman who is done running. She thought, I don't know if I'm that woman yet, but I'm going to try to be. She lay down. She didn't lock the door. He came on a Friday. She knew it was him before she saw his face. She knew it from the way Danny went still in the yard, the way her son's body registered threat, before his mind could name it some animal knowledge he'd built up over 8 months of watching his mother's face go tight at certain sounds. She was splitting kindling at the side of the house when she heard the horse come up the road. She looked up. The man was dressed well too well for the weather, with a wool coat that hadn't seen real work and boots that were more city than territory. He was broad across the shoulders, heavy in the jaw, with the look of a man who had never once been told no by someone who could make it stick. Wade Marsh pulled up at the gate and looked at her the way he always had, like she was a problem he'd already solved in his head and was just now getting around to implementing. "Vivian," he said. "Wade." She set the axe against the woodpile. She did not step back. She'd promised herself standing in the dark 3 nights ago that she would not step back. "You are a difficult woman to find." He dismounted, came through the gate like he owned it. "I've been riding since Tuesday." "Then you must be tired," she said. "You can water your horse at the trough and be on your way." Something moved behind his eyes. Surprised, she thought that she was still standing where she was. He'd seen her run before. He'd expected her to run. "I'm not going anywhere without my brother's children," he said. "You know why I'm here. Let's not do the part where you pretend otherwise." "Lily and Danny are my children," she said. "Not your brother's. Robert is dead, Wade. Whatever claim you think he had died with him. Robert's children deserve a proper home, a father figure, stability." He looked at the house, at the Callahan name on the fence post. "This isn't that. You don't know what this is. I know what it looks like." He took another step toward her. A widow living on a strange man's property with no legal standing and no fixed address. "I know what a judge makes of that." "A Wyoming judge," she said. "Not your judge, not your courtroom, not your state." She held his gaze. She felt her heart hammering in her chest, and she did not let it touch her face. "Whatever papers you have from Missouri, Wade, you'll have to start over here. And while you're starting over, I'll have a Wyoming lawyer of my own, and I'll have witnesses to the fact that my children have been housed and fed and cared for in a stable home environment for nearly 2 weeks, the same environment you're standing in right now." Wade Marsh looked at her. For the first time in 2 years of chasing her, she watched something flicker in his expression that wasn't confidence. "You've been talking to lawyers," he said. She hadn't. But he didn't need to know that. "I've been talking to people who know the law here," she said. Which was true. Ezra had told her everything he knew. That was enough. The back door opened. Ezra came out and stood on the porch. He didn't come into the yard. He didn't touch the rifle leaning against the doorframe. He just stood there in the particular way he stood when he'd decided something and was done being negotiated out of it. Wade looked at him, looked back at Vivi. "This, the man," he said. "This is Ezra Callahan," Vivi said. "He owns this land. And you're living on it." "I'm working on it." Wade's jaw tightened. He was a man who had a speech prepared. She could see at the speech he'd rehearsed on 3 days of writing the argument, the legal language, the pressure points he'd identified and planned to push. He hadn't prepared for her to be standing her ground. He hadn't prepared for a witness on a porch who wasn't moving. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ezra. Then he turned, walked back through the gate, remounted his horse. "I'll be back," he said. "With papers." "I'll be here," Vivi said. She watched him ride away. She kept her face still until he cleared the ridge. Then she turned and put both hands on the woodpile and leaned on it and breathed slow, deliberate, the kind of breathing you did when the adrenaline was still high and you needed to keep it from becoming something visible. She heard footsteps. Ezra came off the porch and stopped beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You did well," he said. "I shook the whole time." "I know." He picked up the axe. "Set it properly against the woodpile the way you set a tool you were going to need again." He didn't. She straightened up, looked at the empty road where Wade's horse had gone. Thought about with papers and what that meant and how much time it bought her and how she was going to use every day of it. "He'll be back in a week," she said. "Maybe less." "Then we've got a week," Ezra said. "To do what?" He looked at her. Something in his expression that she hadn't seen before, not quite the idea of a smile this time, but something more decided than that. Something that had made its mind up and wasn't announcing it yet, but wasn't hiding it either. "To make sure that when he comes back with papers," he said, "we've got something better." He went back inside. Vivi stood at the woodpile in the cold January air of Wyoming Territory in the winter of 1878 and looked at the road Wade Marsh had ridden away on and felt underneath the fear, underneath the calculation, underneath all the practical thinking about lawyers and courts and time. Something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten it had a name. She felt like she was standing on solid ground. For the first time in 8 months, she was not thinking about the next place to run to. She was thinking about what was worth staying for. That was the most dangerous thing of all, and she meant to keep it anyway. The week Ezra said they had turned out to be 5 days. She found that out on Monday morning when old Mo came back from town with flour and salt, and the information delivered as casually as if he were reporting on the weather that a man matching Wade Marsh's description had rented a room at the Casper Creek Hotel and had been seen at the Land Registry office Saturday afternoon. "Land Registry," Vivi said. "That's what Harlan said." Mo set the flour on the counter. "Man's not just filing custody papers. He's looking at something else." Ezra was at the table. He'd been there since breakfast, going through papers, the deed to the property, the cattle registry, the water rights documentation, the kind of papers a man only pulled out when he understood that what he'd built was under examination. He looked up when Mo said Land Registry, but his expression didn't change much, just tightened at the jaw. "He can't touch the land," Ezra said. "It's in my name, clear title." "Not your land he's looking at," Mo said, asking questions about water rights on the east pasture, about whether the creek boundary goes through Callahan property or Porter property. Ezra went very still. Vivi looked between them. "What does that mean?" "It means," Ezra said slowly, "that Porter and Marsh found each other." He set down the paper he was holding. Porter's wanted a reason to contest the east pasture boundary for 2 years. If Marsh can cloud my title raise enough questions that a judge has to look at it, Porter gets his opening, and Marsh gets leverage. They're working together, Vivi said. Or they found a common interest, which is the same thing in practice. He looked at Mo. Who's the judge they'd go to? Harlan thinks it's Pemberton. He's the circuit judge. Due through Casper Creek on Thursday. Thursday. 4 days. Vivi did the calculation and felt it land in her stomach like cold water. Then we've got 4 days, she said. 3, Ezra said. Pemberton always arrives a day early. She stood up. She went to the window. She looked at the road that Wade would come back down and thought about every move she'd made in 8 months, and whether any of them had been right. She thought about what Ezra had said running hasn't worked, and about her dream the green field, nobody chasing, and she made a decision the same way she'd made every hard decision in her life, fast before fear could talk her out of it. I need to talk to someone, she said. In town. Ezra looked at her. Who? Helen Porter. The silence in the kitchen was complete enough to hear the fire breathe. Mo cleared his throat and found somewhere else to be. Helen Porter, Ezra said carefully, is married to the man who's trying to take my land. I know who she's married to. Vivi turned from the window, but she sat in the back of that meeting and said nothing. You said it yourself, that woman thinks before she moves. She didn't speak against you. That means something. Or it means she was waiting to see which way it fell. Maybe. Or maybe she's not her husband's instrument. Vivi picked up her coat from the hook. Maggie's hook. She'd stopped thinking of it that way in the past week, which was its own kind of information. I've been running from people I assumed were against me for 8 months. I'd like to try something different. Ezra looked at her for a long moment. What are you going to say to her? The truth, she said. Same as everything else. He almost smiled. She could see it, the shape of it held just back from his face. He reached past her and took his own coat off the hook and put it on. Then I'm driving you, he said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He picked up his hat. You going to argue with me about this? She looked at him standing there in his coat and his hat with his jaw set and his eyes steady and the particular expression he wore when he'd decided something and was done being talked at about it. No, she said. Good. He opened the door. Jacob, watch your sister and the little ones. We'll be back by noon. Jacob appeared at the top of the loft ladder. He looked at Vivi. He looked at his father. He nodded once, the nod of a boy who understood more than he was supposed to. Yes, sir, he said. Helen Porter answered the door herself, which was the first surprise. The second surprise was that she looked at Vivi and Ezra on her porch and said, I wondered when you'd come, and stepped back to let them in. The Porter house was the largest in Casper Creek, furnished with the careful precision of a woman who had built something out of nothing and needed everyone to be able to see it. Vivi recognized that the deliberateness of it, the way every object in the room was placed just so, not for beauty, but for proof. She had done the same thing in the farmhouse in Missouri, arranging what little she had to make it look like more. Mrs. Porter led them to the sitting room and poured coffee without asking whether they wanted it, which Vivi appreciated. It was the gesture of someone who intended a real conversation, not a performance. My husband doesn't know you're here, Mrs. Porter said. She sat across from them, straight-backed hands folded. He's at the registry office with the man from Missouri. She looked at Vivi directly. Wade Marsh. That is the man's name. Yes, ma'am. He came to see Gerald Saturday evening. Gerald thinks I don't know what they discussed. She looked down at her coffee. I've known everything Gerald has discussed in this house for 23 years. He's a smart man. He just forgets that smart isn't the same as perceptive. Ezra hadn't spoken since they sat down. He was watching Mrs. Porter with the same patient attention he gave to everything, letting it unfold, not pushing. What did they discuss? Vivi asked. The east pasture boundary. A shared petition to Judge Pemberton. She looked up. Gerald wants the water rights. Marsh wants the children. They believe Pemberton will see a pattern unstable household contested landwoman of questionable background and rule in both their favors simultaneously. She paused. They may be right. Pemberton is not a corrupt man, but he is a man who values order above most things. They intend to present your household as disorder. Vivi felt Ezra go still beside her. Not the still of surprise, the still of a man hearing his worst calculation confirmed out loud. Why are you telling us this? Ezra said. Mrs. Porter looked at him. For a long moment she said nothing, and Vivi had the sense of watching a woman decide something she'd been turning over for days. I have a daughter, she said finally. She's 31 now. Lives in Denver. She left 12 years ago because Gerald decided who she ought to marry and she disagreed. She picked up her coffee and set it down without drinking. I didn't stop him. I told myself it was for order, for the family's standing. She looked at Vivi. She writes me twice a year, at Christmas and my birthday. That's what my silence bought. The room was very quiet. I'm not my husband's enemy, Mrs. Porter said. But I'm not his instrument either, not anymore. She stood. She went to the writing desk by the window and opened the drawer and took out a folded paper. She brought it back and set it on the table between them. That is a letter. Signed by myself and by Harlan Cole and by Ruth Deacon, who runs the boarding house and has watched this community longer than anyone. It states that we have observed Vivian Marsh conducting herself with honesty, industry, and care for her children during her time in Casper Creek. It further states that the Callahan household, to our direct knowledge, has operated with propriety and decency throughout. Vivi stared at the paper. It's not a legal document, Mrs. Porter said. But Pemberton knows my name. He knows what my word is worth in this county. She sat back down. Gerald will be furious when he finds out. Why now? Ezra asked quietly. You've had days. Why not sooner? Mrs. Porter looked at him. Because I wanted to see if you'd fight, she said. A man who won't fight for what he's built doesn't deserve help fighting. But a woman who walks to my door when she could have run. She looked at Vivi. That told me what I needed to know. Vivi picked up the letter. Her hands were not shaking this time. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Porter folded her hands. Marsh is still going to bring those papers to Pemberton. This letter helps, but it won't stop the hearing. You'll need to stand in front of that judge and answer questions. I know. He's going to ask about Robert Marsh, about the bank robbery, about why you left Missouri. I know that too. And what will you say? Vivi thought about 8 months of carrying Robert's name like a wound she couldn't stop touching. She thought about what Ezra had said hope and blindness look the same from outside. They're not the same thing. She thought about what she would tell a judge in a Wyoming courtroom, and for the first time the answer came to her without the weight of shame pressing it down. I'll say that I married a man I believed was honest, she said, that I was wrong, that when I found out the truth, I took my children and I left, and that everything I have done since then has been to keep them safe and give them a life worth living. She set the letter down. And I'll say that a woman who has done that, who has kept 2 children fed and whole through 8 months of hard circumstances, is not unfit. She's the only thing standing between those children and a man who wants them as property to control, not as people to love. Mrs. Porter looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said. Say exactly that. Pemberton arrived Wednesday evening, which meant they had one night. Ezra found out from Harlan Cole, who sent his boy out to the ranch on horseback with a note that said only tomorrow morning. Courthouse. Be there early. Vivi read the note over Ezra's shoulder and felt the week's worth of preparation compress into the next 12 hours. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat at the table and wrote. She wrote everything, Not for the judge, but for herself. Every fact about Robert, every date, every decision she'd made after the sheriff's letter, every town she'd passed through, and every door that had been shut, and every morning she'd woken up and chosen to keep going anyway. She wrote it all out in plain language, the way her grandmother had taught her to settle her mind before something hard put it on paper. Make it real. Make it manageable. Ezra sat across from her and didn't ask what she was writing. He worked on a piece of leather harness and let her write. At some point he said without looking up, "Whatever happens tomorrow, those children are staying with you." She stopped writing. "You don't know that. I know Pemberton hears cases across 3 territories. He's seen women running from genuine danger and women running from consequences. He can tell the difference." He looked up. "And he's going to see you walk into that courtroom and stand up straight and tell the truth without flinching, and he's going to know exactly which kind you are. You sound very sure of something you can't know." "I'm sure of you," he said. Simple. Like stating a fact about the weather or the fence line. Like something he'd observed and measured and was reporting accurately. She looked at him across the table. In 11 days, no 16 now, she'd lost count. Somewhere in the middle of normal life she had watched this man feed children that weren't his, without making a production of it. Defend her in a public meeting without asking her permission. Refuse every exit she tried to hand him and sit across from her in this kitchen night after night, saying true things in a quiet voice that made them land harder than shouting ever could. She had spent 8 months not trusting anyone. It had kept her alive. It had also kept her alone in a way that had started to feel like a second kind of dying. "I'm scared," she said. Not the fear she usually admitted, the practical fear, the calculated fear. The real kind. Not of Wade or the judge. Of what happens if it goes right. Ezra set down the harness. "Say that again." "If it goes right. If Pemberton rules in my favor and Wade goes back to Missouri empty-handed." She looked at her hands on the paper. "Then what? I have no property, no fixed address, no family. The road north is clear now. I could keep going." She paused. "I've been moving so long, I don't know what to do with the idea of stopping." The fire settled. The wind outside had gone quiet for once. "Stopping feels like risk," Ezra said. "Everything feels like risk." "No. Moving feels like risk, you understand. Stopping feels like a different kind. The kind where, if it breaks something you were counting on." He looked at her steadily. "That's what you're scared of." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "I buried Maggie," he said. "And I stayed in that bed the night after, and I thought, I will not do this again. I will not build something with someone that can be taken. I will not stand at another grave and account for what I should have done different." He picked up the harness again. That lasted about 6 months. Then Jacob said something at supper that Maggie used to say, same words, same tone, and I laughed before I could stop myself. And I thought, if I close everything off to keep from losing it, what's the point of the everything? He turned the leather in his hands. "Risk and loss are the price of anything worth having. I decided I'd rather keep paying than stop having." She looked at him for a long time. "Jacob's right," she said. "You are the most fit person he knows." That got him. She saw it the way the words landed somewhere unguarded. He looked down at the harness and didn't speak for a moment. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow's early." She gathered her papers. She stood. She stopped at the doorway to the hall. "Ezra." He looked up. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, giving his words back to him, "I'm not picking up that bag again. I'm done running." He held her gaze. Something in his face, the thing that had been building behind his expression for 16 days, the thing she'd been watching approach slowly, the way you watched a change in weather, moved closer to the surface. "Good," he said. She went to the back room. She lay in the dark and listened to the house breathe around her, all 6 souls, the fire, the wind beginning again outside, the particular creak of the porch boards that she now knew by timing and sequence, the way she knew her own children's breathing. She thought tomorrow. She thought, I am not the woman who knocked on that barn door 16 days ago. That woman was still running in her head even when her feet stopped. This woman, this one lying here in the dark without the bag packed and the door unlocked, this one had decided. She closed her eyes. She did not dream of green fields this time. She dreamed of a courtroom, and she was standing in it, and her voice was steady, and the judge was listening, and behind her she could feel without turning around, the way you felt things that were solid and certain. Ezra Callahan standing where he said he would stand. She woke up before dawn with that feeling still in her chest. She got up. She put on her good dress, the one she'd kept folded at the bottom of the bag for a moment that required it. She braided her hair the way her grandmother had taught her. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the basin. A woman looked back. Not a fugitive. Not a widow running from a dead man's crimes. Not the cautious, calculating, perpetually braced person she'd been for 8 months. Just a woman, standing up straight, ready. She went to the kitchen to start the coffee. Ezra was already there. He looked at her in her good dress with her hair done and her spine straight, and he said nothing at all. He just poured 2 cups and set one at her place and sat down across from her. They drank their coffee in the gray pre-dawn quiet while the children slept and the fire worked and the day gathered itself outside, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said, and everything that mattered was already decided. When the light came up enough to hitch the horses, Ezra stood and put on his coat. "Ready," he said. Vivian Marsh picked up her coffee cup, drained the last of it, set it down clean. "Yes," she said. And they went out together into the morning. The Casper Creek Courthouse was a single room with wood walls and 2 windows that let in the flat winter light like it was rationed. Judge Pemberton sat behind a table that was too large for the space, which Vivi suspected was intentional. Everything about the setup was designed to make the people standing before it feel smaller than they were. She had decided walking through that door that she would not feel smaller. Wade Marsh was already there. He stood to the left with a man in a city coat who had lawyer written in every line of his posture, the way he held his papers, the way he looked at Vivi, and then looked at Ezra, and then made a small note, as if their arrival together was itself evidence of something. Wade watched her cross the room, and his expression was the expression she knew best from him, the particular certainty of a man who had already written the ending and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. She met his eyes. She didn't look away first. Pemberton was older than she'd expected. 60, maybe more, with white hair and the kind of face that had absorbed decades of other people's worst moments and learned not to carry them home. He looked at Vivi the way she'd hoped he would, like a person, not a case file. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. "Mr. Callahan." He looked at Wade's lawyer. "Mr. Fenton, let's begin." Harlan Cole was there against the back wall, arms crossed. Ruth Deacon from the boarding house sat beside him. And in the far corner, straight-backed and still as a post, Helen Porter sat with her hands folded and her eyes forward, and when Vivi looked at her, Mrs. Porter gave one single nod. Small, certain. Vivi faced the judge and stood up straight. Fenton went first. He was good, she'd known he would be good. Wade didn't hire anyone who wasn't good. He laid it out cleanly. Robert Marsh, deceased father of Lily, and Daniel Marsh, aged 7 and 5. The children's paternal uncle Wade Marsh, concerned for their welfare following the father's death under criminal circumstances. The mother Vivian Marsh, with no fixed address, no property, no family support, having moved through 4 states in 8 months. A Wyoming household with no legal standing, no formal arrangement, no chaperone. A woman, Fenton said, whose judgment had already been called into question by her failure to recognize the criminal character of her own husband. The failure to recognize. She heard those words and felt them the way she'd felt them every time in 8 months someone said a version of them, like a hand pressing on a bruise. But she also heard Ezra's voice underneath them, quiet and certain. Hope and blindness look the same from outside. They're not the same thing. She breathed. She waited. When Fenton finished, Pemberton looked at her. "Mrs. Marsh." You may speak." She had written it all out the night before. She didn't look at the paper. "My husband died in a bank robbery in St. Louis," she said. "He was one of the men who attempted the robbery. I did not know what he was planning. I did not know the kind of man he had become, or perhaps always was. When the sheriff's letter came, I had two choices. Stay in Missouri, under the shadow of his name, where his brother had the money and the connections to take my children from me regardless of the truth, or leave." She looked at Pemberton directly. "I left. Not because I was running from my responsibilities. Because I was running toward them." Pemberton said nothing. He was listening. She kept going. 8 months on the road with 2 children under 7. Every cent I earned went to their food and their warmth. Every town I stopped in, I worked laundry, mending, farm labor, whatever was available. I kept them clean, and I kept them fed, and I kept them as safe as a woman alone with no resources could keep them. She felt the words settle into her, the truth of them, the plain weight of what she'd actually done. "I arrived at Ezra Callahan's property in a blizzard with no options and 2 children who hadn't been warm in 2 days. He gave us shelter. That is the whole of what happened between us. He gave shelter to a woman and 2 children who needed it, and he did not make us pay for it with anything except honest work, which I gave willingly." She reached into her coat and set Mrs. Porter's letter on the table in front of Pemberton. "That letter is signed by Helen Porter, Harlan Cole, and Ruth Deacon. They are members of this community. They speak to what they have directly observed." Pemberton unfolded the letter. He read it. He looked up at Mrs. Porter in the corner. She held his gaze with the steady patience of a woman who had made her decision and was not reconsidering it. Then Fenton stood up again. "Your Honor, the character of the household is not the sole issue. The issue is stability. The issue is permanence. Mrs. Marsh has no legal connection to the Callahan property. She has no—" "I'll ask the questions, Mr. Fenton," Pemberton said. He looked at Vivi. Then he looked at Ezra, who had been standing to her left, quiet and still through the whole of it. "Mr. Callahan, what is your interest in this matter?" Ezra stepped forward. He held his hat in both hands, not nervously, just the way you held something you respected. "My interest is that a woman and 2 children came to my door in a blizzard and I let them in," he said. "And what I found over the weeks that followed was that those children are well loved and well cared for by a mother who has sacrificed everything to keep them whole." He looked at Pemberton without flinching. "My interest is that I know what a good mother looks like. I've seen it. I've seen what it costs. And I am telling you, as a man who owns land and raises children and has lived in this territory for 15 years, that what I see in Vivian Marsh is exactly that." "And what is the nature of your relationship with Mrs. Marsh?" Pemberton said. The courtroom went very quiet. Ezra didn't hesitate. "She is someone I respect," he said. "Someone I trust. Someone I intend to know for a long time." He paused. 1 beat. "If she'll allow it." Vivi kept her face forward, but she felt it, the words, the plain public weight of them. The fact that he'd said it in a courthouse in front of a judge and Wade Marsh and Helen Porter and Harlan Cole, and all of it without lowering his voice or qualifying it into something smaller. Wade made a sound. Fenton put a hand on his arm. Pemberton looked between them. He looked at the letter. He looked at Wade. "Mr. Marsh," he said, "you've ridden from Missouri to Wyoming Territory to petition for custody of your brother's children. On what basis do you argue the mother is unfit?" Wade stood. He was a big man, and he used that the way big men did, filling space, taking up room, making the room arrange itself around him. "My brother's children deserve stability," he said. "They deserve a proper home, a father, or at least the guidance of family that—" "They have a mother," Pemberton said. "A mother with no home, no." "A mother," Pemberton repeated, "who has kept them alive and healthy through 8 months of difficult circumstances, according to the testimony I've heard and the letter I've read." He folded his hands on the table. Mr. Marsh, Wyoming Territory, granted women the vote in 1869. We did that because we believe women are capable of making sound decisions about their own lives and the lives of their children. I have heard nothing today that suggests Mrs. Marsh is incapable of making those decisions." He looked at Fenton. "Your client's concern for his brother's children is noted. His brother's children are in good health and good care. That is all I need to know." He looked at Wade directly. "Wyoming is not Missouri, Mr. Marsh. You'd do well to remember that before you file papers in this territory again." The gavel came down once. Wade's face went through several things in rapid succession: disbelief, fury, the particular cold rage of a man who had never genuinely considered losing. He looked at Vivi. He looked at her the way he always had, like she was a problem he would solve eventually, like this was a delay and not a conclusion. But he didn't say anything else. Fenton was already gathering papers with the efficient movements of a lawyer who billed by the hour and understood when the hour was up. Pemberton stood. The room shifted, and it was over. Outside, the January air was sharp and clean. The sky had gone the particular blue that Wyoming saved for its coldest days, the kind of blue that made everything look more real than it actually was. Vivi stood on the courthouse steps and breathed it in. She heard Wade's voice behind her. Not words, just tone talking to Fenton in the clipped, controlled way of a man managing himself, and then she heard hoofbeats as they rode away. And then there was nothing but the cold and the blue sky, and Harlan Cole pumping Ezra's hand, and saying something that made Ezra almost smile. Mrs. Porter came down the steps and stopped beside Vivi. "Well," she said. "Well," Vivi said. Mrs. Porter looked out at the road Wade Marsh had ridden away on. "He won't be back," she said. "Men like that, when they lose, they rewrite the story so they never tried in the first place. He'll tell himself he decided it wasn't worth his time." "And your husband?" Vivi asked. "Gerald will be angry for a week." Something moved in Mrs. Porter's expression, not quite amusement. Something more complicated than that, the look of a woman who had made a calculation she'd been putting off for a long time and was reckoning with the result. "Then he'll find something else to be angry about. That's what Gerald does." She paused. "I have been a quiet woman for 23 years. I believe I am done with that." She said it simply, like reporting a decision she'd already implemented. Vivi thought about her daughter in Denver, who wrote twice a year, and about what it cost a woman to decide even 20 years late that her silence was done. "Thank you," Vivi said, "for the letter, for being here." "Don't thank me," Mrs. Porter said with a firmness that was its own kind of warmth. "Do something useful with it." She walked down the steps and down the road, straight-backed and deliberate, and Vivi watched her go and thought about all the forms courage took and how few of them looked like what you expected. Ruth Deacon appeared at her elbow, a small, compact woman who smelled like bread and had eyes that had been watching things for 50 years and made no apologies for it. "You need work," she said without preamble. Vivi looked at her. "Ma'am, I run the boarding house. My kitchen girl left in November, gone to Cheyenne with her sister. I've been managing alone. It's too much for one person in the winter months." Ruth looked her up and down, not unkindly. "You can cook. I saw those biscuits you brought Harlan Cole last week as a thank you. Man talked about those biscuits for 3 days." She folded her hands. "Wages plus a room if you need one." Vivi opened her mouth, closed it. A room. A job. A fixed address. A fixed address in Casper Creek, Wyoming territory. She looked back at Ezra, who was still talking with Harlan, but watching her at the same time, the way he always watched the room, not intrusively, just keeping track of what mattered. "I'll think on it," she said to Ruth. "Thank you." Ruth nodded like that was sufficient, and walked away. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, not the weighted quiet of before, not the kind that pressed, the kind that came after something had broken open and the air was still settling. Halfway home, Ezra said, "Pemberton's a fair man." "Yes," she said. "Told you he would be." "You did." He was quiet another moment. "Ruth Deacon offer you work?" Vivi looked at him sideways. "She did." "She mentioned the room. You knew she was going to—" "Talk to her Monday," he said. "Asked if she had anything." Vivi stared at him. "You—" She stopped. Started again. "You arranged that—" "I asked," he said. She made up her own mind. Ruth Deacon doesn't do anything she hasn't decided for herself. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Thought you should have options, so the choice wasn't between the road and staying on charity." She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the way he held the reins easy and certain, the way he held everything. "It wasn't charity," she said. "I know that. You know that. Wanted to make sure you had something that proved it to the part of you that was still arguing." He paused. "Is it still arguing?" She thought about 8 months. She thought about the bag she'd stopped packing. She thought about the peg on the back room door, Maggie's peg, and how she'd stopped thinking of it that way, and what that meant, and whether she was ready for what it meant. "Less than it was," she said. He nodded. That was enough for him. They turned onto the ranch road, and she saw the house ahead, smoke from the chimney, the horses moving in the paddock, and on the porch Jacob standing with his hand over his eyes, against the glare, watching them come in. When they were close enough, Jacob called back through the door, "They're back!" The door opened. Grace came out first, then Lily, then Danny, at a dead-run coat flapping, who launched himself off the porch steps at Vivi before the wagon had fully stopped. She caught him barely the impact, nearly knocking her sideways, and held him with his legs wrapped around her waist and his face in her neck. "We won," he said. "Where'd you hear that word? Jacob said if you won, we could have pie." She laughed. The laugh came up from somewhere deep and real and surprised her with its own force. "Then tell Jacob to make pie," she said. "Jacob can't make pie." "No," she agreed. "But I can." She set him down. She looked at Lily, who had come down the steps slower, who was looking at her mother's face, with those measuring eyes, reading her the way she always did, checking the information against what she hoped it said. Vivi opened her arms. Lily walked into them, and held on without saying anything, and that was everything. And Vivi pressed her face into her daughter's hair and breathed, and let the weeks of tension move through her and out the other side. Over Lily's head, she saw Grace standing next to Ezra, slipping her hand into his with the unconscious ease of a child who had always done it. Ezra looked down at her, and something crossed his face that she was only now learning to read, the look he kept mostly out of sight, the one that was not controlled or managed or held back from the world, just real. Just his. He looked up and found her watching. He didn't look away. Old Mo appeared from the barn direction, limping and unhurried. "Well," he said. "Pemberton ruled for Vivi," Ezra said. Mo looked at Vivi. "Course he did." He said like it had never been in question, like the last 2 weeks had been a minor inconvenience the world was now correcting. He pulled the barn door open. "Horses need seeing to." Jacob was still on the porch. He had both hands in his pockets, and he was looking at his father with an expression Vivi recognized, the expression of a boy who had asked a question 9 years in and was finally seeing the answer take shape. Ezra walked up the steps. He stopped in front of his son. "You all right?" Jacob said. "Better than all right." Mrs. Porter was really there at the courthouse, standing in the corner like she owned the place. Jacob absorbed this. Huh. He looked past his father at Vivi, who was coming up the steps with Danny on her hip and Lily's hand in hers. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her since the beginning, careful assessing, running the calculation. Then slowly, something in his face that had been braced for a long time loosened. "I'll make the pie crust," he said. "If you do the filling." "Deal," Vivi said. He went inside. Grace followed, pulling Ezra by the hand. Danny wriggled down and chased them. Lily went last, pausing in the doorway to look back at her mother. One look quick and private that said everything, a 7-year-old couldn't quite put into words. Then she went inside too. Vivi stood on the porch alone for a moment. She looked out at the land, the white fields, the dark line of pines, the road that wound down to Casper Creek, and continued past it north toward the canyon pass that had been closed when she arrived, and was open. Now had been open for 2 weeks, the road she had chosen not to take. She thought about Wade Marsh riding back toward Missouri with his lawyer and his papers and his story already being rewritten in his head. She thought about Robert, and she did what she rarely let herself do. She thought about the good parts, the early parts before she'd learned what was underneath them, and she let herself be sad for those without letting them be an accusation. They were what they were. They had given her Lily and Danny. That was not nothing. That would never be nothing. She thought about Maggie Callahan, who she had never met, who had braided Grace's hair with the same hands that had taught Jacob how to check if wood was caught, who had argued with Ezra about cattle decisions and usually been right, who had died in February and left a peg on the back room door and a rocking chair. No one had sat in, and a husband who had learned slowly and with great difficulty that the only way to honor the dead was to keep living. Ezra came back through the door and stood beside her. He looked out at the same land she was looking at. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, "Ruth Deacon's offer. Are you taking it?" She thought about the room, the wages, the fixed address, all the things a woman needed to stand on her own ground. "I'll talk to her tomorrow," she said. "But I think—" She stopped, started again because it deserved to be said straight. "I think I'd rather figure out how to be useful here. If that's something you'd—" "Yes," he said. No hesitation, no qualification. Just yes, the way he said everything he was sure about. She looked at him. He was looking at the land still, but the corner of his mouth had moved, not the almost smile she'd catalogued over 16 days. Not the idea of one, but the real thing. Small and private, and meant only for this moment. "There's a lot of fence needs work," he said, "come spring. I noticed. East pasture especially, and the barn roof on the north side. I'm not afraid of a barn roof. I know you're not." He finally looked at her, straight, clear. The look he'd been moving toward since the night she told him about Robert, and he'd said hope and blindness looked the same from outside, and she'd understood that this was a man who thought about things the way they actually were, not the way they were convenient. "I'm not asking you to fix my fences, Vivi." "I know what you're asking," she said. "Then you know I'm not in a hurry," he said. "We do this right, or we don't do it. I've got time." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 30 seconds of a dream and green grass and nobody chasing. She thought about what it cost to believe in things and what it cost not to, and which was the worst debt to carry. "So do I," she said. Inside, Danny was explaining loudly to Grace the correct hierarchy of the Bean Army, which had apparently expanded during the morning and was now engaged in some kind of territorial dispute on the windowsill. Jacob was saying something in the low-voiced tone he used when he was actually paying attention. Lily laughed, the real kind, the kind that had been gone since Kansas City, and the sound of it came through the door and the wall and settled into Vivi's chest like something coming home. Ezra held the door open. She walked through it. The kitchen was warm and full of noise, and the smell of coffee, and the particular chaos of 4 children and one old ranch hand who had materialized from somewhere and was supervising the pie situation with the authority of a man who had opinions about crusts. The fire was going. The table was set for 6, had been set for 6 for 2 weeks now, as if the house had simply decided and rearranged itself accordingly. Vivi tied on her apron. She went to the counter. She started on the filling. Jacob came and stood beside her the way he'd stood beside the fence line and the stove and the barn door, watching, measuring, and then deciding. He handed her the nutmeg without being asked, because he'd been paying attention and he knew she always reached for it next. She took it. She didn't make anything of it. Neither did he. But when she glanced sideways at him, she caught the tail end of something on his face. Something young and unguarded, something that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago before he put it away and went back to looking 9 years old and serious. Outside, the afternoon light hit the snow and turned it gold the way Wyoming light did in the last hour, before it gave up the day briefly, extravagantly, as if apologizing for all the gray. It came through the window and lay across the table and the floor and the children and the old man and the man standing in the doorway, watching all of it with the expression of someone who had decided once a long time ago not to want things anymore and had been slowly proven wrong. Vivian Marsh stood in Ezra Callahan's kitchen in the winter of 1878 in Wyoming Territory on a piece of land she had no legal claim to and every human claim that mattered, and she made a pie while her daughter laughed and her son commanded his bean army. And the man she had not been looking for stood in the doorway and let himself be glad. She had knocked on a barn door in the dark and asked for one night. She had gotten a life instead, and this time she intended to keep it.